Albert Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself." Sometimes technology makes us feel like 6-year-olds, especially when hackers try to use the internet to steal something from each of us. If you think you have nothing of value to a hacker, think again. You and everyone you know are exactly who hackers target every day. This is DIY Cyber Guy with David W. Schrofer. Every week, he will show you how cybersecurity can be as easy as locking up your house at night. Now, here is your host, David W. Schrofer.
Welcome, everybody, to DIY Cyber Guy. Now, this is the show to listen to stay on top of online risks, from hackers to cryptocurrency, privacy issues. If you understand the risks, it's easier to stay safe online. And again, it's never been easier to listen to the show. You can watch our new YouTube channel, or you can download our free podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player.fm, Stitcher, Overcast, Listen Notes, and now we're on Spotify as well. So wherever you listen to your podcasts, that's where you will find DIY Cyber Guy. And be sure to click subscribe wherever you see our show. And please tell your friends, spread the word. This is the show to listen to stay safe online. So if it's helping you, help us help your friends by spreading the word as much as you can. So on with the show. This is a hair on fire 5 out of 5. Now, the name of the show today, the Reddit hack, what you need to do right now. So this is a hair on fire 5 out of 5, meaning stop what you're doing if you use Reddit or have used Reddit, especially if you've used it anonymously or through either through subreddit or you have used email digests. Stop what you're doing and listen carefully to what happened and what you can do about it. So you probably read about the hack that was released by Reddit on June 19th. And the hackers obtained 2 different sets of data. The first one was dating back to May 2007, and it contained usernames, email addresses, and encrypted passwords. But it's the second part of the breach that's even more concerning, because this could affect a far larger number of Reddit users, especially people who used Reddit under a pseudonym. And that's because the hackers were able to access logs related to the site's email digest function, which is basically logs that contained information over a 15-day period, like a person's username, email address, and an actual, the person's real identity. So that's a lot of information that the hackers can use to exploit those people. And I've got a list in the show notes to one of the news articles that was written about this hack. Now, here with me to talk about that today, and more specifically what you can do about it, is Richard Barbieri. Richard is the Senior Risk Operations Manager at Etsy. And prior to his time at Etsy, Richard was also an analyst in the Cybercrime and Identity Theft Bureau of New York County's District Attorney's Office. That's one of the coolest titles I think I've ever heard. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much. It was not quite as exciting as the title, but it was still pretty good.
Oh, it sounds like keep the mystery alive. Now, for clarity, you're not an officer or director of Etsy, is that right?
That's right. So anything that I'm sharing here today, just to be clear for the record, is my own opinions, my own views. I'm not representing Etsy or speaking for Etsy or anything like that.
Perfect. So back to the Reddit hack. So one of the things we've talked about on the show a number of times is when your password is stolen from one site, it's often used to attack another site. And those lists are made available for sale out on the deep web. So obviously, some of the users of Reddit are going to have a username and a password that they've reused on other sites. What would your advice be for them as a cybersecurity and fraud prevention expert?
So, I think the obvious piece of advice is anywhere that you have the same password that you had on Reddit, you need to go in and change that. I think that's something that people probably know in advance at this point, or you should know that you need to have good password hygiene and not be reusing the same password in multiple places. But I think, the number one critical thing is if that's your Reddit password, go in and change it. Make sure, especially if it's places, your financial institutions, your credit cards, your IRA, anything like that, make sure that that's changed today, now.
Even close iterations of the password, right? So if my password was rainy day, and on Reddit, and my password on my bank was rainy day 1, probably still a good idea to change the password, no?
Yeah, very good. Definitely a good idea. And I know people who do things, they have a password, so their password will be rainy day. And then on Reddit, it will be rainy day Reddit. And then
Yeah,
on their bank, it'll be rainy day Chase. And then, their credit
yeah,
card, it'll be rainy day American Express. And
yeah.
you don't have to be, a high level intellect to figure out how you can make that work.
Right, exactly. And on the topic of high level intellect, these are things that can be programmatically discovered because when a hacker buys a list of stolen passwords, they don't typically buy one at a time. They buy 1 million at a time. Or in the case of the Yahoo breach, they could buy, what was it? I think 1.5 million in a single data set, or 1.5 billion in a single data set. Something just outrageously large numbers. What the hackers will do is write programs to look for patterns like that. The word chase, the word edit, Reddit, or the word Yahoo, or something incorporated into a password, and then replace that with the names of other companies.
Yeah, it's absolutely, for hackers like that, it's a volume game. It's like drilling oil wells. You're not expecting that when you drill, you're going to hit oil. You're not expecting that every time you try a password somewhere necessarily it's going to work. But if you
Right.
have if you have 1.5 billion, you have a really good shot. But even if you
Yes.
just have a few 100,000, you're going to get some, and you only need to get into a few bank accounts to have really made it worth your while.
Yeah. So what's some good other than changing the password? That's obvious, but can you give our listeners some tips about what to change the password to, or how to make it different? Not random per se, but a little bit harder to guess in something like a brute force attack when the hacker just tries every possible combination of letters and numbers and symbols. But what's some good advice about how to generate a good password?
So, I would say, one of the easiest things you can do is there's a lot of automated tools out there that will enable you to generate passwords. And, look, if somebody's really going to do a brute force attack and they're absolutely determined to get into your account and your account only, then they probably can do it. But, there's off the top of my head and I'm not endorsing anyone specific. There's one called Dashlane, there's 1Password, there's several like this, and those tend to have automated password generators as a part of that. And if you do that, it's also a case of, I don't know how many of people who are listening remember there used to be something to stop car theft called the club. And it was this silly red thing that you strapped to your steering wheel. And, a car thief could actually probably take the club off in about 30 seconds.
Right.
But if it's the 30 seconds they're taking the club off your car or the car with no club, it's, you might as well go for the one that has no club. So, making your
Right.
password harder to guess, something that a hacker, if they're doing this automated analysis, they look at it and see your password is a nonsense combination of letters and numbers and symbols. They're not going to try to, they're not going to spite you and try to figure it out just to see what they can do.
Now, full disclosure, one of our main sponsors is Anchor ID, which is a multi-factor authentication company. And we always on the show recommend turning on two-factor or any multi-factor authentication that's available. Anchor ID isn't available on every site. No multi-factor is available on every site. But what's your opinion about turning on two-factor authentication or any multi-factor product that's available? That's a good idea, right?
Oh yeah, two-factor, in terms of, look, password hygiene is great. Having two-factor is another level entirely. That's something that you should do. It's something that I think a lot of places should probably mandate in ways that they don't. And making sure that, if you're going to be doing, getting into the site, especially places where you're talking about movement of money or, look, people love Reddit. I'm on Reddit, but, if somebody gets into your Reddit account, it probably is not going to be the end of the world. If somebody gets into your bank account and empties out your IRA, could be a major life-changing event that you could spend months, if not years, trying to get all yourself back in order from that. So having
Right.
two-factor turned on, whatever kind of two-factor, if your bank offers it, or even if a relatively minor site offers it, you should absolutely have that.
Now, what other types of problems are there out there? So we're talking about passwords getting hacked, hackers coming into systems all the time. As a fraud expert, and again, to be clear, not an expert on a guy who commits fraud, on a guy who finds fraud and stops it before it happens. What kinds of things are you finding in the marketplace today that hackers are trying to do to steal people's money?
I think the biggest thing that we see, and from talking to other merchants as well, I know this, is, and this sort of relates to the idea of the breaches, is account takeovers. Because, fraudsters have discovered most companies, at least most larger companies, are pretty good that if somebody, signs up with a new account or is signed in as a guest user with a stolen credit card and they're trying to buy, if it's Tiffany's, they're trying to buy a $5,000 tennis bracelet. If it's Amazon, they're trying to buy 10 iPads. Most companies are pretty good at recognizing that's suspicious behavior and at least making sure those orders have a second set of eyes on them, or that the machine learning process tags them out. When you're talking about account takeovers, getting into the account of an established user, someone who's been on the site for 5 or 10 years, which you can easily be on Amazon,
Sure,
and is suddenly, is someone goes on Amazon, especially on a day like Prime Day. If you go on Amazon on Prime Day and you buy a big screen TV and you ship it to a different address, that might not be that suspicious. So that, I think, is a big trend we're seeing, and something that a lot of online merchants are learning to have to combat.
Basically, just doing a transaction based on a credit card that's stored online, and hoping that there's so much volume around it that it will not get noticed.
Right. And then looking at it and just saying, okay, here's Richard's account. Richard has been shopping on Amazon. Sometimes he buys books, but sometimes he buys expensive electronics. Today he's buying expensive electronics. We have no reason to think this is any different. And sometimes it's even a case of they won't actually change the shipping address that's on file with the account. But then once they've made the order, they'll contact FedEx or UPS or the shipper and say, oh, actually, I meant to ship this to my father's house. Can you ship it to this different address, please?
Okay, that's interesting. So that can be done if I've got an order in transit from an e-commerce company, and assuming I have the order number or the confirmation number, or whatever the case may be, I can call the shipper and have them divert that package from one address to another.
It depends. Some companies have Amazon, and I don't know what Amazon's policies are. I'm just using them. I'm picking on them because they're the big dog.
Yeah.
But some companies have it in such a way that you have to make the change of address request through them, and they either approve it or deny it. But in some companies, it is possible to call the shipper and just have the address changed. What's interesting is when I was actually with the district attorney, we had a case with somebody who was doing this, and he would literally stand outside. It was an apartment building. This was in New York City. He would literally stand outside the apartment building, and when the UPS truck or the FedEx truck pulled out, he would make it look like he was walking out of the building. And he would say, "Oh, is that the iPads for 6B? That's me. I'm Bob. Yeah, I'll just sign for them. Save you the trip."
Really?
Yes. And UPS drivers are not supposed to do that.
Okay.
They're supposed to deliver it to the actual address.
Yeah.
But they're only human. And if somebody, they think, oh, I can save myself a trip. Yeah, I'll let the guy sign it.
Right.
So we used to
walk up or something like that.
Right, exactly. They just think, oh yeah, what the hell? It's the guy. So we would see cases like that sometimes, incredibly.
Interesting. I mean, just one more reason to call out if you see a creepy guy hanging out in front of your door of your apartment building complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing to call out. So let's talk about the best way for a user to get control of their exposure in hacks like this. Obviously, not reusing the password, not reusing iterations of the password, turning on multi-factor authentication wherever that's available. That's those are the first elements in the on the list. Do you have any specific advice about what kinds of sites to use or what kinds of information to give out to further protect yourself online?
Something that I've seen in some sites, and it's interesting because I've seen 2 sites recently that did this, and this is something that I think is probably an easy thing for users to do, and it speaks to that thing around account takeovers, is sites that actually have the option to require you to re-enter the CVV number, which is that 3 or 4-digit number on your credit card, whenever you make a purchase. And, I understand that's a hassle. Part of the thing that has made Amazon is that one click where you just one click and there it goes.
There it goes, yeah.
But, in the world where you have to be concerned about that security, being able to have that kind of option turned on, and, it's not re-entering a full 16, three-digit number on the back of your credit card for you is easy to memorize.
Right. So even if the attacker had your 16-digit credit card number and your expiration date and the full name on the card, if they don't have that number on the back, then that feature would trip them up and they wouldn't be able to go forward with it.
Or even if they don't necessarily know it, but they're in your account. So in that case, if they don't know any of your information, they just know I can click this button and get a package delivered.
Right, exactly.
Whereas if they have to enter that number, that can trip them up.
Got it. Interesting. You mentioned account takeover and the prevalence of that. Do you know of any dollar figure that's associated with the cost to a company for each individual account that is either taken over or breached in some way?
Yeah, so I know there was recently a study, I think it was from IBM Security, did one, and I think the number that they said was that the average cost per user breach is about $230.
$230, okay.
Yeah, and I think obviously that number is going to be, very variable. I'm sure if a big bank has a breach and customer information, account numbers, things like that, social security numbers are getting out, they're going to have to spend a lot more. Excuse me. Right. Whereas, for someone like Reddit, not to minimize the importance of a Reddit breach, but that's names, email addresses, related passwords. There's a lot less PII that someone like that owns than a bank or a financial institution would have.
Okay, great. So you said IBM, so I'll make sure for my listeners that we have a link to, I assume that's an article?
Yeah, so it was a study that IBM did just around like what a data breach would cost, and obviously they have a horse in the race. They're trying to sell you their protection against data breaches, but I don't think
it doesn't make the data invalid though.
Right, exactly, and I don't think they're exaggerating or telling any fibs that when data gets breached, it costs real money for the company. I'm sure anyone who works at Target could tell you that when you have a big data breach, it's a big problem. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I was just the one thing I would also say as part of what that IBM report had was also just talking about reputational loss. It's not just the cost of doing credit reports, freezing credit reports for your customers or making good of customers potentially, but it's also that, an example of Target, it cost them business because people thought, well, I don't want to shop there. That's where credit card information gets to get leaks.
Yeah, right. Even though they fixed the problem, and we've talked about the Target breach a couple times on the show. It was actually a air conditioner repairman that was the cause of the leak. The computer back in the database, and they have methods to protect against that now. But it's the first time something like that is used for a major attack that gets everybody's attention.
Yeah, I remember I heard a story that there was a breach that occurred because this is one of these Internet of Things stories, that it was a fish tank was connected to the network at a company, and the hackers were able to get in by breaching the fish tank's security systems.
Yeah, and that's an interesting topic because we've talked about that before, because most people who use computers and Internet of Things devices would kind of roll their eyes and say, no way, that's not possible. But it actually is possible when there's not, the whole idea is that the Internet of Things device is used to get into your network. It gets past your firewall because the device itself is not built with any level of security, thinking that who'd want to hack a fish tank? Well, they don't want to hack a fish tank. They don't want to change the rate of bubbles coming out of the thing. What they want to do is get inside your network and see if there's an open port or a file database that they can access, or anything else that might be available to them on the other side of the firewall. But the IoT discussion is a whole nother ball of wax. So we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about that, Richard.
Yeah, definitely a big one. You could spend a whole lot of time on that.
You could spend a whole series on that. So, Richard, thanks very much for being with us today. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
So they can follow me on Twitter. I'm at rbarbierinyc. This time of year, it's about a 50-50 mix between fraud things and me ranting about the Yankees. But I promise after this, I'll try to stick a little more to the fraud side. And, of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And if any of your listeners are going to Money 2020 in Las Vegas in October, I'm presenting on a panel there as well. So I'd love to meet some people.
Oh, fantastic. We'll put a link to your Money 2020 appearance in the show notes as well, so people can know exactly where to find you. And just go to DIYCyberGuy.com and click under guests, and you'll see Richard Barbieri's profile, and all the links will be right there. So, Richard, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been great having you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
That's all the time we have today for DIY Cyber Guy. Remember, you can find our free book, which is a chapter of my book, Digital Habits, at DIYCyberGuy.com/free. You can also buy my book, Digital Habits, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook at DIY Cyber Guy. And remember, our podcast is available iTunes, Google Play, Player.fm, Stitcher, Overcast, Listen Notes, and even Spotify. And click subscribe if you like what you see. And if you like what Richard had to say and you like the advice that he gave you, please give him a thumbs up if you're watching on the YouTube channel, or just to subscribe to the podcast. You can get more good advice with every show. Thanks very much for listening, and come back again.
Thank you for listening to DIY Cyber Guy. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this broadcast are for general information only, and we have not knowingly divulged any information that would conflict with any of our non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. Enjoy the internet safely.